Hello, everybody. How are you? Welcome to our Shannon Says series. We're so excited to have you. I know we have a few more people jumping on right now. So real quick, just a little bit about who we are, what we do. Of course, this is Senior Advocate. We do events for seniors throughout Hampton Roads and the Richmond area. And we're super, super excited to be able to offer this series. It's been great so far. We've learned so much information. So we're just thrilled to be able to partner with Park Zeigler and Shannon Laymon-Pecararo to get all this information to you. Couple quick notes. If you are on Zoom, and you have questions during the presentation or after the presentation, what you can do is you can either send them through the chat box, which is if you take your cursor and you go all the way down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a whole bunch of icons, and one of them is the chat box. If you click on the chat box, you'll see it pop up on the right-hand side. And over there, you can actually write notes, ask questions, things like that. We will not take questions until the very end. So you can do that. Or if you don't really know how to do that, a lot of people are still not as familiar with Zoom as some of us are. You can always text me during the presentation. My number is 757-645-6364. And I'm going to say that again. It's 757-645-6364. So a couple of housekeeping notes. We do have a couple of sponsors besides Park Zeigler and Shannon for this series. We have a couple of gift cards we're going to be able to give away. One of our sponsors is Timewise Concierge, and the other sponsor is Heritage Oaks in Richmond, a beautiful retirement community. So thank you to them. And then we also will have a giveaway for a free assessment with Shannon. So we'll have 3 prizes. If you stay till the end, we'll be choosing somebody at random to win those. So we're going to jump right into it now. I want to introduce Mrs. Shannon Laymon-Pecararo. She is a certified elder law attorney by the National Elder Law Foundation. What's interesting about that is there are only a little over 500 certified CELA, which is the certification attorneys nationwide. As a CELA, she has experience in assessing the care and planning needs associated with the aging process. We are super excited to have her here today. Shannon, do you want to jump on? I see you're on there.
I'm here.
You're here. We can see you.
Yes, let me get my screen shared for you guys. Because I have limited Wi-Fi where I'm at right now, I probably will not be coming on the screen, but you guys need the presentation anyways. But I have a grandfather that can right now.
We can see your pretty face on your PowerPoint, so that's enough.
And of course, hold on, I got to move this toolbar because it's like jumping in and I can't hit the present button. There we go. Does that look good on your end?
No, it still shows a bunch of different things. So I think you need to hit present to show there we go. That's perfect.
All right, cool. I think there's a little bit of delay there. All right, guys. So as Stephanie said, I am a certified elder law attorney. And so as part of the series, some of you have probably been here since the beginning, but really walking through step by step kind of all of the things that I work on as an elder law attorney. And what I always tell people, what makes me different from actual estate planning attorneys is the public benefits knowledge. So the understanding of how Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and all that stuff kind of works in. And so I think the biggest kind of crisis situation that I end up in is usually how do we pay for long-term care? And so this next 45 minutes is going to be dedicated to that. If you do have questions, don't hesitate to ask during hand. Stephanie usually fields those and gets them to me. All right, so what is long-term care? That's kind of like the beginning point. And when you're trying to do research or trying to figure out any of that stuff, that's really a starting point. And so really all it is, it's a continuum of care that's really designed to provide services for a long period of time. So the vast majority of people think that, well, I have Medicare, I have Blue Cross Blue Shield, I have TRICARE. They're going to take care of me. They pay my bills. But they are what's called an acute care policy. And so what that means is that if you fall and break a hip, or if you, you know, whatever, they will pay for any surgeries that need to be done, the initial hospitalization, and they're going to pay for rehab. But once it boils down to a period of time where it becomes extensive, and usually they say anything over 100 days becomes long-term care, or if rehab's not helping, whatever, it's just going to be this is your new state of life, then that's long-term, and insurance itself does not pay for that. Assisted living is really good, like when we've got dementia and stuff like that. And the average is that 50 to 80% of people inside an assisted living facility have some sort of cognitive impairment, and they require assistance with 2.8 out of the 6 activities of daily living. And so what that also means is that we're on the verge of what's called skilled nursing level of care. So whenever I start looking at kind of what benefits are available, the biggest thing I have to look at is somebody skilled nursing? Are they nursing home level of care? And that's 3 out of 6 of activities of daily living. And so we're talking about feeding, bathing, dressing, going to the bathroom, walking and transferring. Those are your 6 ADLs. So if I talk about that, that's what I'm talking about. And whenever I talk about feeding, I mean physically picking up the fork and feeding yourself, not meal prep. That is an instrumental activity of daily living. Services can be delivered at skilled, which we just talked about, in intermediate, or it could just be custodial. It could just be that they're providing the roof over your head and some sort of monitoring. The largest part of long-term care is that custodial care, that roof over your head piece of it. And then providing assistance with activities of daily living required as a result of, you know, whatever it is, an illness, an injury, dementia, those types of things. The statistics are pretty staggering. And so, you know, I talk to a lot of people and they don't want to think about this. And it's interesting. I just met with one of my real clients from 2019 earlier this morning. And she said, you know, you just turned 40 yesterday. Are you, you know, you see this, you live this, you breathe it. You know, I've got a grandfather currently dying. He's 85 in Pittsburgh. And she's like, you know, are you afraid of it? And I said, no, because I've always known the statistics. So 25% of our population as a whole has some sort of disability. 70% of people over the age of 65 are going to need some sort of long-term care. And the other statistic is that 80% of people over the age of 80 need long-term care. So I'm very well aware of what it is, and I can kind of plan ahead and, you know, whatever. The vast majority of people, we don't want to think about this, but, you know, I kind of live, eat, and breathe the field. So I'm in a different, you know, set of circumstances. But this is kind of what we're looking about. And so, you know, realistically, we need to start understanding what is this going to look like for us. When I talk about what the cost of long-term care is, and this is coming from the 2021 Genworth Cost of Care Survey, I need to update the numbers a little bit, but a home care aide is about $18,000 a month. And what I'm looking at is like around the clock, like you need somebody there. What I'm going to tell you is all of these numbers, they are always lower than what I see as an actual practicing attorney. So realistically, even though this is what Genworth Cost of Care Survey is saying, realistically, I am seeing home health care between $30 to $35 an hour. All right. Can you find care cheaper by paying people under the table? Absolutely. Is it illegal? Absolutely. In-home care providers under IRS regulations are not independent contractors. They are household employees, meaning that you are responsible for being an employer, getting an employer ID, withholding taxes, all that fun stuff. And so I always tell people that, you know, you can't deduct it on your taxes if you don't do it well. From a Medicaid perspective, if you're paying somebody under the table, it now looks like a gift that I've got to clean up on the back end. People are not usually forthcoming in getting the documentation that I need from a Medicaid application in those situations. So $30 to $35 an hour is the realistic in-home care cost right now. Community and assisted living, we're looking at adult daycares are about $1,600 a month. Assisted living, somewhere about $4,600. What I'll tell you is I think realistically we're closer. I have recently found one out in Portsmouth that's about $4,000. But realistically, we're closer to the $6,000 amount, and it's going to phase up based off of whatever your tiered care needs are. So the more care you need, the more expensive it's going to be. And then when we go into nursing home, it's semi-private versus private. Those costs are on there too. Realistically, a private room, I'm seeing closer between $10,000 to $12,000 a month. So anyways, that's what we're looking at when we're talking about cost of long-term care. And a lot of people don't realize it. Most people say, I want to be in my home, but they also don't realize that that's the most expensive care that you can get. And we also run into issues with caregivers calling out, not being available when they need to be, all that fun stuff. So planning for the cost, planning for whatever it's going to be for you becomes super important in understanding all of this. All right, so what are the funding sources? Because most people think, oh, well, somebody's got to be paying for it, or Medicare's paying for it. I had a father-in-law, and if you see me next month, I will use him a lot because he was a veteran, 100% service connected. So he thought that the VA was going to take care of him. That wasn't the case. But anyways, these are kind of the number breakdowns. And if you see, almost 50% of the people that need long-term care, it's covered under the Medicaid program. And so I get all the time, well, don't you got to be broke in order to get Medicaid? No, you do not. There are things that I can do to help protect some of the assets. I always tell people my job is to stop the bleed. I can't necessarily prevent a total bleed. And so it's just understanding that we can protect some of the resources, still get Medicaid in place to prevent impoverishing a spouse if they need care, or otherwise just depleting assets, that you might need for other things. So Medicare is only covering about 18%. As I said, that's going to be more of your rehab side. There is some in-home care benefit, but it's very nominal. And you're going to see it a lot more on the hospice side of things. Other public benefits, that's where like your VA stuff is going to come into play. 13% of Americans are able to privately pay for the care that they need. So these are pretty staggering percentages when you look at them. Oh, and the private insurance, those are your long-term care insurances. All right. Solutions. The biggest thing is to make sure that you have a good estate plan and to develop a long-term care plan. Now, I have already talked about estate planning, so I am going to actually kind of bypass a lot of that discussion. I know Stephanie has these recorded. So if you ever want to go back and look at it, you can, or if you follow Senior Advocate, I'm out and about with them on a regular basis talking about this stuff. And so really I'm going to skip like the fiduciaries and all the other kind of stuff for this presentation. All right. So when we talk about Medicaid planning, there are and that's really what you see as the major pay source for all of this stuff when it comes to long-term care. And whether or not people can privately finance it, like I've just met with the couple earlier today, they have several $1 million. They can privately pay for things. But at some point in time, the wife may say, Brad, I'm afraid I'm going to run out of money. And so even if you have money, sometimes it's still like you still get this. I see it all the time where it's just a fear of how long is this going to, go on, because we don't know how long we're going to live. But Medicaid planning, there's two different ways to plan. The first one is crisis planning, which is really just when you actually need the care, or you can do 5-year planning. 5-year planning is a little bit more difficult for some of my clients. And that's because essentially you have to give up control. And so not all of my clients are ready to give up 100% control to whoever they're going to move this stuff to. And I don't recommend outright gifting. We can spend a whole hour on just the consequences of not using trust to do this planning, but I'm not going to go into all those details. One of the things that I see a lot is people want to either put their kids on their deed or give their house away. There are negative tax consequences to doing that. And so I normally do not recommend doing that. Instead, we use what we call residence trust or an income only trust, sometimes children's trust, in order to protect what's called the Section 121 exclusion, which is what provides for like if the house sells, the capital gains exclusion. And then also preserve what's called a step up in basis. So that way your kids aren't paying unnecessary capital gains tax after you die and the house is sold. Medicaid planning is all about utilizing exceptions under the law. All right. And so there are some very common exceptions. The first one, spouses. If I have a spouse, I can protect nearly 100% of what the couple has. And so there's no reason to be impoverished at that point in time because of care. If you have a disabled child, there is another exception to being able to make transfers there. And then caretaker child, I can protect the house that way. If you have minor children, that's another exception. And they must be your children. I recently had a case where they thought that they should be able to protect because they were the legal guardians for their grandchild. However, they never formally adopted that grandchild. And so as a result, it doesn't fall under a child exception, even though there is a legal obligation to provide for that child. So really, whenever I'm talking about exceptions, the underlying concept is that under the Medicaid application, there is a question that asks, have you made any uncompensated transfers in the last 60 months? So 5 years. That's what the 5-year look back is. And so people think, oh, well, I gave $1,000 to my wife, that's going to count, and I'm not going to get Medicaid to be able to pay for my care now. No, you can give unlimited amount of money back and forth between spouses. That's not going to impact that 5-year look back rule. The other thing is that just because you might have violated the 5-year look back rule, that doesn't necessarily mean we're not going to get care either. There is a way that we can protect about 50% by gifting everything over. And it's so just about kind of understanding the rules. What the 5-year look back rule says is in the event that you did make a gift, we're going to divide that by a penalty divisor. And so basically for every $7,023 you give away, it's going to be a 1-month penalty period. Usually, and we do what's called a reverse half loaf that allows us to protect half if we use that kind of strategy. The other thing that we do in Medicaid planning, aside from, moving stuff over to other people, is we can also purchase exempt assets. So 2 of the things that we commonly do is we look at purchasing savings bonds, because I can purchase $20,000 per individual and Medicaid can't look at them for a year. So that's an easy spend down without wasting money. Purchasing the burial too, because a lot of people, they either have life insurance that we need to cash out or whatever, and we just need to get that paid for, and it's exempt from Medicaid as long as it's an irrevocable prepaid burial plan. Sometimes if we have to, if I have a married couple, converting assets into an income stream. So if I have $2 million sitting there and I'm like, what do I do with this? And, the family is saying, well, I'm afraid I'm going to run out of money. I'm only in my 50s, because I do have, younger people need this too. I can actually convert that into an annuity stream. There's federal law guidelines on how this has to be done. So don't try and do it on your own. But what that does now is it changes from an asset that Medicaid can look at into an income stream for the healthy spouse. Medicaid can't look at her income. And so that's one way that we can also establish eligibility. This will not work for a single individual, because that income is when you're the one that needs care, they do look at your income. As I said, sometimes we do make the transfer, especially in a crisis plan. We make that transfer with the anticipation that we're going to protect about 50% of the family assets. Stephanie, are there any questions so far?
Nope, not so far. You must be hitting all the things that they're interested in learning about. So,
or just talking like super complicated right now too. There's that possibility as well. All right. So we just talked about the Medicaid planning side of things. The other thing is that we live in a very big military community, and so we do have some veterans benefits. A lot of people are very familiar with the compensation benefit, and that is your service-connected disability benefit. That is not what I do. I refer out for every single last one of those cases. Instead, I work on the pension side. Okay. And you can't double dip in the VA system. If you're receiving the comp benefit, then the pension benefit is like nominal. You get the higher of the two, essentially. And so depending upon your family makeup, whether or not you've got 2 service members, whether or not you got one with a spouse, whether or not you got one with a dependent child, those types of things, it depends on the amount that you're entitled to. They are not going to cover very much. The money doesn't go very far. So for an individual with a spouse, I mean, we're talking about $3,000 a month. When we're talking about $10,000 bill, it helps, especially on the assisted living side where Medicaid doesn't pay for that, but it's not going to cover the full bill. And so I always tell people to, understand that. If you are 100% or if you're 70% or higher in the VA system, the good news is that there is an ability for them to pay for a private pay nursing home if necessary. But the VA facilities have to be basically completely booked and everything else. So 70% or higher on the comp side, you have an automatic protection there too. So whenever I look at the pension side of things, what I'm looking at is number one, do you meet the service? Because there's a couple things I can't fix, right? If you don't have the service requirement, I cannot fix that problem. And you had to have been 90 days active duty, 1 day of which was during a period of war that's defined by the VA. For Vietnam, the time periods are very different. There's one time period where it's you were directly in Vietnam. There's also another one where you were not physically in Vietnam to cover. So that's the one time period that I always have to be like, okay, were you there or were you not? And mind you, I said active duty. So one of the common misconceptions is that reservists and National Guard are eligible for this benefit. Unless they had 90 days of active duty during wartime, then the benefit is not available. So that's hurdle number one. Do you have your service? Can't fix it. Got to have your DD 214. Got to prove the service requirement. And then there's a medical requirement. And unlike the Medicaid benefits where we're looking at actual skilled nursing level of care, theirs is a little bit more flexible. So yes, you could need your activities daily living assistance, just like Medicaid, but there's also this kind of more cushy benefit that's available for dementia. And what they essentially say is that like basically you need some sort of protection against harms of the outside world. There's also a housebound benefit. So like if you can't leave the house, they recognize that that's also a problem because other people need to assist you with, just even getting out of the house. So once again, I can't fix a medical benefit or medical requirement. You either need it or you don't. And then there's an income requirement. The income test here, I essentially say that your cost of care has to exceed your income. And what's going to happen then is that will give you your full benefit amount. And that's the easiest way to kind of look at it. There is a 5% that like the tax on to the income too, but essentially as long as the care is exceeding the income, then you'll be eligible for the full benefit amount. One of the things that people try to do is they try to get the benefit turned on before they place an assisted living. That will not work because you are not yet incurring the cost of care. You must be in an assisted living facility or otherwise paying caregivers before this will turn on. And then you have your asset test. So prior to October of 2018, we did not have a hard and fast rule. I could make gifts. I could do all kinds of stuff and easily get veterans benefits. Well, they caught on to it. And now as of October of 2018, we do have a 3-year look back. The amount that you can keep is not as low as the Medicaid side where you can only keep 2,000. Instead, and for a married couple, it's more, I'm talking in generalities. But for the VA, we're talking roughly, I think it's $148,000 this year that you can have. That does not include your primary residence plus 3 acres. So, we don't live in the country around Hampton Roads. Well, I mean, I do, but we're not on 150 acres. But if you have 150 acres, that's going to be a problem. So it's your house plus 3 acres, and then that's exempt. Medicaid or VA won't look at it. And then there's like a couple different other exceptions, but the house is a primary one. When we're looking at this benefit, one of the big things I want to do is I want to move the house inside of a trust. And the reason why is if the house ever needs to get sold, the cash is going to be an asset that will then kick people off of their veterans benefits. However, under policy, because it's an exempted asset, they don't ask about the transfer of it. They don't care what you do with it because they're not going to make you do anything about it anyways. And so by moving it into a trust, moving it out of the individual's name, it's not penalizing for VA, but if we need to sell it because people don't want to pay for the upkeep, whatever the case may be, if we sold it while it was still in, let's say, mom and dad's name, what'll happen is the money is now mom and dad's. Guess what? If I transfer the money, we have now got problems, but it's owned by a trust. We transferred the house, not the money. And so it's an exemption under veterans benefits. So that's kind of where I say my biggest veterans planning benefit is. It's important to note that the rules for VA do not mirror Medicaid. We have a 3-year look back period, not a 5-year. That the strategies I use under Medicaid where I can protect 50%, that does not apply in the VA realm. They will not allow what's called partial cures of the gift. And also, like the house exception, for instance, is a different one. So, and you're only missing out on a couple $1,000s. So it's easier to get through a 3-year period. I do tell people that whenever I'm doing a VA plan, I am looking at a 5-year Medicaid plan as well. I want to make sure that whatever we're doing, we're potentially getting benefits within at the 5-year mark for Medicaid too. All right. So basically what do we need to do is we want to avoid procrastination. Unfortunately, I see all too well, and all too often, people believe that their loved ones are going to get better. And so the best time to get me involved in looking at the paying for long-term care is actually while somebody's still in the hospital before they've been discharged anywhere. And that's because we can start doing the planning. We can start protecting assets right away. This is critical for a married couple in particular. Whenever I get brought in while somebody is still or they're in the nursing home, but let's say they've gotten a discharge notice, now I've got to fight a discharge. We're trying to do a crisis planning with maybe 2 days left in the month. And I'm like, nope, sorry, we're going to have to privately pay for a month, whatever. And so I can protect more the earlier I get brought in. The other thing is if you are comfortable, one of the things that, like I just met with somebody yesterday, we're doing this, they know that they are very real estate heavy. Most people, their like biggest asset is their primary residence. Well, it's very easy for most of my clients to say, okay, I'm willing to put that inside of the trust. I understand that I lose control over it. I give it the control to my kids or, whatever. But we do a use and occupancy agreement. So you still get to live there. And congratulations, you're going to continue to still pay the taxes, the repairs, everything else that you otherwise would have. And so my families are usually very comfortable with at least starting that part of the plan. The cash is a lot harder to move because most people are not willing to say, hey, by the way, I want to give everything that I own over to my kids. And whenever I need something, they're going to take care of me. Usually it's not 100% move. Usually it's a partial move when we do have a family that wants to go ahead and start doing that. But, the sooner that we can do it, the better in terms of the amount of money that can be protected. It's also important that whenever you're looking at this type of planning, that you're working with somebody who really knows what they're doing, that they've done this. I've been doing this for 12 years. I jokingly was told just yesterday that it looks like I'm reverse aging. So even though I guess I'm looking younger than what I did even 2 years ago, I've been doing this for a long time, so I understand the complexities involved. But we really need to understand your family circumstances. A lot of my clients, like, I want to dig out the dirt. I need to know, like, do you have a drug addict in your family? Is there any mental health issues? Do you have a kid with special needs? Because all that gets built into the plan. We need to plan around it. We also need to make sure that you're working with somebody who understands all the different types of planning, right? It's one thing to do, and this is what I'll tell you is probably one of the things that drives me nuts the most, is that I will have an attorney that did the estate planning documents and say, but I don't know the long-term care side, and then send over to me. Great. I love the referral. I love working with family. That's fine. But the hardest thing for me is whenever I tell the client, sorry, I got to redo your power of attorney. And that's because anytime I'm doing long-term care planning or, Medicaid planning, VA, I'm moving assets. And so the terms in that power of attorney really tell me whether or not I can do the level of planning. And so unless you do what I do or you're very experienced, sometimes I get provisions inside the power of attorney that says that I can't make gifts, or it's silent in gifts, which means I can't make gifts. Or it'll say I limit gifts to the annual gift exclusion amount. Well, that is all estate planning stuff designed for tax purposes. That doesn't help me in the long-term care arena. And so while the documents are perfectly fine, they just don't meet the long-term care side of things. So that helps avoid some of the frustration whenever I have to say, hey, by the way, I got to redo your powers of attorney, because clients don't normally like that. We also want somebody who isn't a one-trick pony. I often think outside the box. I work with a lot of personal injury attorneys, and it's funny because they'll come to me and they're like, we need a special needs trust. And I'll look at the file. I'm like, no, we don't. We can do X, or like, we can do this, or they've got a spouse and they've already qualified for Medicaid. So let's just move everything over to the spouse, which is it's totally permitted under our Medicaid system, because once one spouse is eligible for Medicaid, they no longer look at what the other spouse has. They don't care. Like, literally they could win the lottery the next day and everything's protected. And so it's really about understanding it. There used to be a lot of like life and health practitioners or whatever, where all they can sell you is an annuity. That's the only way that they can get paid because they're not lawyers. And so what happens then is, like, you're stuck with one option. You're not stuck with, well, hey, we can do X, Y, and Z. What do you want to do? Pick your poison. And so, you want to work with people who can do all that. I will tell you, I have my life and health license. I have my Series 65, not because I sell those products. It's not because I'm managing investments day to day, but it's because I need to understand how everything you have implements into the plan. What are the tax consequences? Sometimes whenever I'm working in estate planning, it's really just, hey, did you realize that you're in 90% stock? And so your portfolio is really risky. You can probably dial that down a little bit, right? And so that's really what that's there for. And like I said, you want it to be comprehensive. You want to make sure that we're looking at financial side. You want to make sure we're looking at the estate planning side. You want to make sure we're looking at potential long-term care. Every estate planning file I have, when I start talking about like, hey, in the event you need long-term care, would you want us to be able to protect your assets? And some people say no, like, this is my money, I want to use it for me. If my kids don't end up with anything, that's fine. That's great. Like that's your choice to do. But I talk about it because I want to make sure that we're thinking about it and we're not in a crisis whenever something does happen. One thing I always tell people is don't try this at home. The laws are constantly changing on this stuff. And one prime example is I can't start a penalty period at home. So whenever I was talking about avoiding procrastination, if you got a mom who is not, not married, let's say, and I need to implement that reverse half-life strategy, well, I need her to be in a nursing home while that's happening because I can start a penalty period there. I can't start it at home. If you would have talked to me 2 years ago, they had temporarily changed the law to say, yes, we could start it at home. And now it's back to you can't. So the laws are constantly flipping back and forth. And what this is also telling you is you can't rely on what worked for your neighbor. And that's because your neighbor's assets are completely different than your assets. The family structure is completely different. And when you've got evolving and changing laws, once again, I can't start that penalty period like I did for your neighbor. So that's always important. There are so many different options available out there that it's really kind of walking through. A lot of times, once I can kind of get some basic information. So like when people come to my office, I want to know, what do you have? What is your family? I want to know all the dirt related to the family. Not because I'm nosy, but because I want to make sure that I'm not leaving a drug addict child or somebody with mental health or a disability and outright inheritance that, number one, could kill them or disrupt their public benefits, whatever the case may be. And the assets, I need to kind of start looking at what is it that we're going to do? It's really just a bunch of puzzle pieces I got to put together. As I said, what I'm doing whenever I'm looking at these types of plans are the financial pieces. What estate planning documents do you have? What are the tax implications? Because once again, I can't avoid taxes. My goal is to minimize taxes, but I just can't completely avoid them. And then because like if you have an IRA, for instance, I have to treat that very, very different because if I liquidate that thing, then what's going to happen is we're going to get a big tax bill as a result. And so we want to take those over, a period of time. We don't just want to liquidate them. And then the public benefits, what are available for you in your situation? The in-home care Medicaid benefit, which there is an in-home care benefit, there's an income cap on it. And so realistically, under policy, there is an ability to do what's called a month-to-month spend down and still be able to use it. The thing is as a practitioner, I know that logically it's not possible because what we're asking those in-home care agencies to do is provide the care with the possibility of getting paid 3 to 4 months down the road, assuming you make your spend down requirement. Not too many care providers are willing to stick their neck out like that whenever they've got other people who are willing to just pay up front. The other thing is they're getting paid a lot less under the Medicaid program than a private pay person. So being able to get them to agree to work on these things can also be very difficult. There is no easy answer to any of this stuff. It's a process. I mean, I'm working on one file right now where I've got to go back and collect 6 years worth of data, not because they did anything wrong, but because the marital snapshot was 6 years ago. And I've got to pull all that information to calculate what the resources were back then and then carry them forward. And so, it can be exhausting. It's a lot of work, but once it gets turned on, at least it works and it helps, protect the family. And it's complex. I mean, most of us either have or will face this type of planning. And I use my grandfather that's dying right now. I actually kind of use him as an example sometimes because my family is from the mountains of Pennsylvania and a lot of my aunts don't work. And so when my grandmother was sick, all my aunts were there. She had 5 daughters and 2 sons. One son has since died, but all aside from my mom, all of her kids are up there in Pennsylvania. And so they were able to all step in and they just kind of shared the responsibility. With my grandfather, same thing. I mean, literally the conversation today was, I told my family, I said, why are you keeping him in the hospital? Why are you not just bringing him home? Like, you guys were all there. Like, what are we doing here? And it's because a hospice worker told him something. But it's kind of, we don't in this area in particular, I don't see that as often. A lot of times the family members have to work. And trust me, my family is not wealthy by any means. It's just they live in a very kind of poor area. And so they only need one, or, and I can't say poor, but really the real estate's not very expensive. It's just a low cost of living. So they can live off of one, one person's income. And so, they have that luxury to be able to spend that time, provide the care. Whereas a lot of mine are like, no, I still got to work. There's no way that I can be a primary caregiver and give up my future earnings and everything else. And so, that's another little complication that I sometimes have to deal with. So, I think that's it that I had for today. Stephanie, are there still no questions?
There's no questions in the chat box. I did get one texted to me, and it was a gentleman that makes, I think he said about $2,600 a month in Social Security, but he doesn't have any savings. He rents. He doesn't own own a home. He doesn't own his car. He has car payments, and so what he wondered what could be done for him, if anything, in terms of, I guess is there any way that he could be on Medicaid? I think that was sort of what he was getting at.
And I know he's texting you. The question becomes whether or not there's a care need for it, or are they over age 65 and potentially, so there's so many different Medicaid programs too. Like I was focusing on long-term care, but there is what's called a Medicare savings program. And Medicaid becomes a supplement to your Medicare if you're on Medicare. And so that would cover like your Part B premium, depending on your income. It would also then cover, it would just work as a supplement to your Medicare. And so it kind of depends on what they're looking for. Now, in the event that they're not old enough yet to get Medicare, they're not on Medicare, right? Then that becomes an issue. And if they don't need long-term care services, I can't use what's called the ABD system. And so the question is kind of what Medicaid are we actually looking for?
Okay. Yeah, and I think that was kind of, I obviously he's on here right now. He just didn't use the chat box. He just texted me.
And Alice just said to explain a little more about the statement of what they don't care about what the other spouse has. All right. So, what I'm talking about here is they care whenever you put the initial application in. But what you hear me saying is there are strategies. I can protect the money. Like it's hard on these like short little durations and not being able to kind of use like client specific data, right? Because I would normally in my meetings, I will actually put all the assets out and say, this is what we're going to do here. Boom, 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 and kind of walk through it. But once one spouse qualifies for Medicaid, so we've done the actual Medicaid spend down and all that other kind of stuff. What happens is that they basically treat a married couple as though they're single individuals. And so the healthy spouse literally can win the lottery the day after their unhealthy spouse gets their Medicaid approved, and Medicaid can't look at it. They can't look at the spouse and say, hey, by the way, you now got to privately pay for care because you now got $1 billion in the bank account. And when we're establishing eligibility too, they don't look at spousal income. They only look at the income of the individual that needs the care. So hopefully that explains what you're looking for, Alice.
Okay, perfect.
Also about amount back and forth between spouses. So what happens is so under the Medicaid program, the person who needs care can't have more than $2,000. I always say $1,700 because literally one penny over is a problem. So when we're working on spend downs, we don't push the limits. The healthy spouse can have 50% of the marital assets, and there's a floor and a ceiling to that. And so what I've got to do something with the other 50% whenever I'm working on the initial Medicaid application. Afterwards, we don't care. Like literally, you can get it all back the next day. They don't care. And so the back and forth, it's like if everything was in husband's name and the wife didn't have anything, but it's the husband that needs the care, what happens under that scenario is that we can move the assets from the husband over to the wife in order to establish that eligibility. So that's that back and forth piece that I was talking about. So Alice, I hope that gives you what you were looking for.
Awesome. Looks like you have done everything and talked about everything that people want. I'm sure we'll get other questions afterwards. This is so great. We're excited to hear about next month's series presentation, which is all about veterans benefits. So let's get right to the winners of our fabulous door prizes. So the winner of the TimeWise Concierge gift card, which is a gift card for Amazon, is Lynn Enos. The winner of our Heritage Oaks gift card, which is a gift card to Cracker Barrel, is Sarah Gold, and we'll be mailing these to you. And the winner for the free consultation with Shannon is Holly Leland. So congratulations, ladies. Shannon, thank you so much for your time today. We'll look forward to seeing you next month, and everybody have a great day. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.